Hey, it's Kari at StudioR12 Stencils, and when you think of Christmas, you might not think of Paisley, but today they are going to go hand in hand, and we have a great lesson for you on painting patterns through your stencils. We are going to get started today with what we like to call a dry fit, and that is putting your stencil down on your surface before you paint. So then you can know where you want it lined up, how it lines up, how much space you're going to have at the top and the bottom. So this Merry Christmas design that we are painting today is a 3-part stencil that is 6 feet long. When we make these stencils, we make them 12 inches across. The surfaces that we use are called 1x12s. You can get them at your local hardware store. They are 1 inch thick, 12 inches across, and then you get them cut as long as you want. So we sometimes get 4 foot, 5 foot, or 6 foot. So you'll go in and say, I want a 1x12 and I want it 6 foot long. Now, with those 1x12s, the width sometimes varies. So this one is actually closer to 11.5 inches rather than 12 inches. Our stencils are typically 12 inches across just to give you that space. So I wanted to make sure I laid it out, put it exactly how I wanted it. And what I did was take my triple threat, which has a lead, a stylus, a white lead, and then it actually has an eraser, so it's a quadruple threat. And I just marked on here where my S was at the very bottom, and I'm not going to have to worry about my middle or my top. I'm going to leave my top on here, but these build. So once I paint my Mary and my CH and my R, on the second layer, when we put down the stencil, the portion of the R from the second stencil will show you how to line it up. So we should be good to go once we line it up, but we just like to see kind of where things are stacking up. If you don't necessarily want to paint Mary, you just want to paint Christmas, maybe you want to put a pattern at the top and the bottom, then you can adjust your stencil if you want patterns in both places. So it just kind of gives you an idea of where everything is. So let's talk about prepping pine surfaces for painting tall porch signs. We have videos showing you everything you need to know. I already have mine prepped. The prep work takes quite a bit of time when you are painting tall porch signs. We start with sanding, so we make sure that we go over with a very low grit sanding paper so that it's pretty rough, just so we can make it nice and smooth all across the board. And then we go into shellac. And what shellac does is it helps cover the knots. So for some projects, if you are painting a dark background, or if you are staining and want to see the knots, you won't need to use shellac. Shellac is going to be used when you have a light background and don't want the knots to bleed through over time. So we learned that the hard way, and we have some signs that we painted before we knew about this product, and over the years they started getting brown spots where the knots are, where that sap was still seeping through all those years later. So the shellac will help with that. It comes in 2 forms. It comes in a spray, or it comes in a can that you can apply it with a brush. I prefer the spray. I think it's just really easy to take it outside. I do left to right all the way down, then I do left to right all the way up. I let it dry. It is kind of fumey, so we do recommend going outside, but I prefer the spray and prefer to do it all over the surface. In the past, when we first got it, we were just covering the knots, but my personal preference is to do it all over, and then you have a nice even coat before you lay down your next layer. The next step that we like to do is the DecoArt multi-purpose sealer. So this is going to be before you paint, and this is going to help keep your project safe when it is outdoors and the elements on your porch. So we don't do this on all projects, but if we are going to be painting for outdoors, then we add this layer in just so we have a little bit more protection, because we spend all this time painting and we want to make sure that it stays safe. Tall porch signs use a lot of paint. A lot of paint. So a lot of paints come in 2 ounce, or 8-ounce bottles. Because we do so much painting, we started getting Sherwin-Williams house paint in these 29-ounce containers because we're painting in bulk. And if you are painting to sell or you're painting a lot of porch signs, that might be something you consider with the colors that are going to be your background and your base coat colors. So we have a StudioR12 paint color guide. And throughout our projects, we will say I'm using color number 27, which is our white. And so then it'll show you on here a Deco Art similar color and a Sherwin-Williams similar color, so that if you want to grab some bulk for your projects, or if you just want to test it out, you can go in, you can take this in with the numbers, and they can grab you those colors as well. But when I was prepping this project, I did 2 layers with a roller just to get a little bit of a base coat, and then I did 2 layers with a polyfoam brush. So that is 4 layers of white. It was a ton of paint. This guy was almost full when I started it, and now it's maybe a fourth the way full. So you are going to use a lot of paint, so keep that in mind. This is the design that we are painting today. It is one of our favorites. We have done it several ways with several different color schemes. On this project, we did a pattern in the background, but today we are going to do a pattern through the letters, and I'm super excited. I recently had painted a Paisley project and thought, what if we put Paisley with Christmas and did it through the letters? So I'm going to show you how to do that. But since I grabbed this, I do want to show you on this R, we have a red background, a black pattern, and multiple layers of white paint. You can see that that knot is still turning a little brown and bleeding through several layers of paint. So even if you aren't doing a light background, if you are going to be using light or white paint on your projects, this is a prime example of why you want to use that shellac so that it doesn't change colors. The colors we are going to use today for our project are number 18, which is our favorite Christmas red, and 28, which is black. We have our palette paper that is reusable Mylar. Let's talk about the colors and where they are going to go. So our main portions of our letters are going to be the red color, and then our drop shadowed portion, which already came on this stencil, as well as our Mary, is going to be black. And I am going to use a couple of different brushes here. I'm also going to grab the Multimaskers because we want to make sure that we are masking off the places that we don't want black. Now I'm going to start with the Jumbo Dome brush. This is a 1-inch dome brush that says StudioR12 on it, and that's pretty cool. We come to our paint, and then we come to our paper towel, and we offload, and then we start to swirl. So one thing that you could do when you are thinking about your project, you're going to think about your colors before you paint. I could go ahead and paint all my letters and make them red and then switch to my black, which I actually think I'm going to do, because if I get black paint in the portions that I want red, then it might be hard to coat those over. However, if I get red paint in the portions where I want black, the black paint will cover it. So if I have any ghosting, then it will be okay. And I think I actually want to paint the big letters with a Jumbo Dauber. I love the Jumbo Dauber because it's gonna cover really super duper fast. However, we will have to be a little careful around the part that is drop shadowed. So we're gonna get the paint on our Jumbo Dauber. We are still going to come off to our paper towel and do some offloading, and then come and start moving around. You can also grab your Multimaskers here to help with the not ghosting under. You could also use tape here. Since this is a pretty large area, the taping off is not going to be terrible. And if we are doing multiple layers, you might decide that taping off is just a lot easier than using the Multimasker in this case. Sometimes when you are trying to get in the corners, you might have to use 2 of the Multimaskers, or if there's drop shadow on both sides of this, so I'm just going to line up 2 of the Multimaskers, hold them down as I go. Now this can get a little tricky if you're trying to hold multiple things with 2 hands. I can go ahead and hold these down with 2 fingers and then jumbo daub with the other hand. When you are moving these around and flipping them over, keep in mind which side that you have been using. I almost made a boo-boo and flipped it over, so it's sometimes nice to be able to flip it over and use them exactly where you want. However, I do have red paint on them, and if I flip it over in the wrong spot, then I could potentially get red paint in the white, and cleaning up ghosted red paint on white is, it's one of the hardest things. It's really miserable, so we just want to be cautious as we are doing this that we're not going to make that mistake. So I'm going to accidentally get some red on this one in the portion where the black goes, so I can show you what it will look like when we cover it later. And that because the other color we are using is darker, that it will be okay. And then that also leads to the thought that if we're going to be painting it another color anyway, and it is a darker color, you could use a roller with your red and roll out this portion, and then use your brush on the black portion, and then be good to go. So that's something to think about too, just for ease. I think I have a little bleeding under on this R, so we'll check it out after we're done with painting our layer here. So we have to be cautious with our jumbo dauber, just like with our brush, that we are offloading, we're not getting too much paint, because I am seeing a little bit bleeding under, and it's not on the first couple portions, but on the R, there's a little more paint, and maybe I was getting a little sloppy because I was talking, so I'm going to get the click eraser, gonna get it wet, and then just come along my edges here and clean up where I have a little bit of red. You want to get a paper towel here just to daub off that wet spot, because if you rub it, you're going to rub your red paint. So cleaning red paint off of a white background is really difficult. You can see that I've kind of erased some of the paint that I want, but that's okay because we'll come back into that. But being cautious, paying attention to what we're doing, especially with red over a white background, is really the name of the game. So we're going to come into our second layer. On this layer, I am going to use a dome brush so I can show you what that looks like. And this time we are going to stipple because it's going to cover more area quicker. We have 3 coats of our red paint done. I'm going to pull this back and show it to you. So we talk often about red paint takes a lot of time to cover. This is 3 coats. The amount of coverage and the boldness isn't as important if you were just painting red over white, because you are going to have something else over top. When you are stenciling, you are probably going to have a plan in your head like I did. Remember, we were going to start with black, well, and then we moved to our red, and it was for good reason. Well, so now we're ready for our next step. And originally, my next step was going to be to go back to the black. However, as I'm thinking it through, I am going to go to our Paisley stencil next, because our Paisley is going to be white. So if we would paint the black first, then we would have to mask off or tape anywhere that is black before we painted our white Paisley, otherwise we would have white Paisley. But since the background is already white, if we put our paisley down and do the white paisley, and if it gets in here and we ghost, it's not going to cause a problem because we're going to paint black over top of it. So my mama always told me to work smarter, not harder. So that's what we are doing today. We have lots of different sizes of paisley stencils, and as you can see, the paisley pattern grows and gets bigger as the stencils get bigger. So I had recently used this 15-inch one on a project to show how to make a frame using a pattern stencil, and this time I'm going to use the smaller one because it fits right over the letters, and it's going to give us more of a design since the pattern is smaller. So when I think about lining up on this project, I am going to see what fits best for each letter. So for our C, this area has a lot of the paisley pattern that will show up in the letter. So that is why I'm going to paint it there. And I am going to tape off across here just to make sure that I remind myself not to paint my H, because I'm not ready for that yet. So when you are painting a pattern through another portion of your stencil, you will leave the main stencil on your project, put the pattern over top of it, and then repaint. So the pattern only gets in the open part of the stencil that you want. Let me show you. We're going back into our number 27, which is our white. And some stencil basics. We are just coming across here. We are getting the excess paint off of our brush, and then I am going to stipple. I don't love to swirl patterns just because it takes a while to paint them. One thing about swirling patterns that you might want to do is the swirls do help get it into some of those nooks and crannies. So that is a good reason to swirl. I just don't find myself swirling a lot on porch projects just because they are so large and take so much time. But if you are going to stipple, make sure that you are doing a lot on your paper towel so that you're not bleeding under. Bleeding under patterns is very difficult to clean up, especially a tight pattern like this one. And reminder that if you are painting white and red together, that you will want to make sure that red is completely blow dried before you go in with the white paint. Otherwise, you are going to have a pink paisley. And Steve just gave me a super great reminder that the bleeding risk is going to be a little bit larger when you are stacking your stencils. So because I have two stencils stacked up here, the paisley stencil is not down flat on my surface, so there is a little more room for the brush to get underneath it. So holding it down as you go, making sure that it's not moving, making sure it's taped, making sure that you are offloading. Those are all ways to help prevent that bleeding under. All right, would you like a sneak peek? Let's be very careful, and we are going to peel this back, and voila! And so then let me do another peek for you. We're going to peel back both stencils here. And there you can see we have a really cool pattern through the C. All right, let's get this done. I cannot wait to show you this as a finished project. Okay, so when you are doing your pattern and you have your stencils layered, you will want to be peeking before you take your stencil off completely to make sure that you actually did get all of the areas that you want. So yes, I can see the red. However, just to be safe, before I pull this off to move it, I will want to peek back and make sure that I don't have any like really glaring areas where I forgot to paint. All right, do you want to take a sneak peek with me of what this is going to look like? We're going to pull this back, and that is so cool. It's exactly how I had imagined it, and I can't wait to get the black drop shadow underneath it to really make it pop. And I think it's fun that we're doing a pattern that's not really a Christmas pattern. Like when I think of Paisley, I think of Americana and summer, but I am absolutely loving it on this. And I think that since we painted it through the letters, there's not really a full portion of the Paisley that you can see. So unless you really know or tell somebody what stencil you used, I don't think that Paisley is actually what their mind is going to go to. It's just going to look like a beautiful pattern on your project. So we're going back into our black, and we are going to finish off our Mary and finish off our drop shadowed portion. So with the Mary, I'm going back into my jumbo dome brush just because it covers a lot of area in a short amount of time. I'm going to be swirling one way and then swirling another way just to get the bristles of that brush into all portions of my project. So I was swirling a little too hard and my stencil just lifted, and now I have an accidental shadow right here by the Y. So Patty just did a very good video on how to get a shady drop shadow. That is not what we want here. So I'm going to go into my click eraser. I got it a little wet. I'm just going to drop that back and then use my paper towel to dab it off. And then once it's dry, we'll put our stencil back on and just be a little more cautious next time. Now that we have 2 layers done, I am going to go into a stippling just to get it bright and bold so that that black really pops off of the white background. I am going to go into a smaller brush as I start to get into the drop shadow area, and I am going to get this time, instead of using the Multimasker, let's show you how you would tape this off. You're going to be very careful not to push super hard on your stenciled area because you can peel up paint. So I'm going to make sure that we are taping off on the stencil itself and not specifically on the portion that we just painted. So one of the problems with this tape is that it is straight and this C is curved, so we do have to use multiple pieces and make them a little shorter so that we don't ghost under here. And doing this is exactly why we made the Multimasker, because look how much tape we're using. Look how much time it is taking to tape. So we could have probably already had a layer of our black done with the Multimasker, but it is nice to show the reasons that we do things and to explain why we love our tools that we use. All right, so that is all taped off. So now we're going to come back into our black paint. Since we did tape it off, we could use the bigger brush, but I have smaller hands, and sometimes I like using a smaller brush when we are stippling. So you can see that we are starting to cover up some of those spaces that we accidentally ghosted under. And so the black, once we are finished, will cover that red. So sometimes just thinking about how things will work in the long run and thinking things out before we paint can be super beneficial for time and our projects and our sanity. I'm gonna let that dry and go on to my next one. So when you are stippling, it might take a little bit longer to dry than when you swirl because you're applying more pressure. You have a little more paint on your brush because you are applying it more. And then since we are just painting small areas, it doesn't have as much time to dry by itself between layers if we keep going back and forth. So this is a place where you'll want to use multiple of the Multimaskers. And you could tape these down or you could just hold them, whatever you're most comfortable with. And just move them right along. You will want to make sure that when you are doing this black portion of your project that you are using small brushes, you are masking off, you are being more cautious than you have ever been, because it is going to be really heartbreaking for you if you accidentally get black through part of your project that is Paisley. Because to get that off, you can use the eraser. However, the eraser is going to erase fresh paint. So you could erase the black, erase the Paisley, erase the red, and then have to go back and do those layers. So anytime that patterns are involved, you definitely want to take your time, go slow and steady so that you don't have to go back step after step and then repeat it. Are you ready for the big reveal? We are going to peel back all of our stencils. We did 2 layers of the black. You can take a look at it and see if you like the boldness of it or if you would have done it a few more layers. But ta-da! I love how this turned out. The black really makes the red pop. Steve and I were talking about we could have done red for the drop shadow, but I think that with the red and the black, it definitely makes it pop. We also could do red with the Mary, so we could do a little bit something else up here and do red with a black drop shadow, just to give it an extra layer so that it doesn't just look boring because we have so much going on down here. However, sometimes having too much going on will really draw away the eye. We could also come up just across the edge here and do a really thin band of the Paisley so that we cover up some of this white space, but there are lots of options. Okay, so we're not going to paint this entire project on camera. You have a really good idea of how this works, how the layers work, which is really the name of the game today, is painting your patterns inside of the stencils and how to lay your stencils to make that work. However, I do want to show you how to line up your tall porch sign stencils or your multi stencils. So we have our portion 2 of this. And so you can see on this second portion, it has a very tiny bit of the R. So now we know we can tape down here, paint the IS and T, and then once that's finished, there's a little bit of the M on this stencil and the full M is on the final stencil. So you have portions of those letters to make sure that you're lining up perfectly, and we take out any of that guesswork for you. When you are finished painting, you'll want to make sure that you finish with a polyurethane varnish. We really like a matte varnish for outside projects, so that way if the sun hits them, you don't get any glare. You'll want to varnish all of the sides, especially the bottom if it's going to be on the ground. There might be some moisture that comes in. You will want to think when you are painting about if you're going to paint both sides, maybe you paint the side edges a certain color or make it reversible, but using a polyurethane varnish is really going to help with protecting it when it's outside. If you love this lesson and want to see more videos on how to paint patterns or how to paint projects for your porch, be sure to subscribe right here to StudioR12 Stencils on YouTube. Ring the bell so you can be notified anytime we add new videos.